Okay, so we're just about ready to start chapter 20, love and awe, or love and respect. And last week we spent time thinking about both those ideas, both those meditations, and we began the chapter by saying that it all starts with respect. Respect has to precede the love. First of all, because we're serving God, and if it's service, it has to be about the other, not about myself. So the respect comes first. But also because love without respect is not really love. It's just the other person cannot receive it as love, so it's really meaningless. It's not really love. So the respect has to come first. This week we're going to continue on that theme about the awe and respect, and we are also going to talk a lot, to some degree at length, about the idea of how to develop an emotion, the emotion of respect, or the awareness of respect. And we're going to go back to what we discussed in chapter 3. Chapter 3, we spoke about the makeup of the soul, and we said that there are 3 intellectual soul powers, sphirot, and 7 emotional. And we said that the parents, the intellectual sphirot, are like the parents because they give birth. The awareness gives birth to emotion. If in your mind something is desirable, if you're in your awareness it's desirable, then your heart pulls you in that direction. If in your mind something is negative, then your heart pulls you, repels you from that thing. So that's father and mother. Father and mother is chachma bina, as we discussed, and they give birth to the children, which is the emotions. Okay, but we have another sphera, another intellectual soul power, and that what you call dat, knowledge. And there, Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains, and here he elaborates upon that, is that the idea of knowledge is really to make the abstract concept, to make it real for you, to make it concrete. And only then will the emotion follow. So you can have abstract knowledge. I could know something to be true. It could not affect me. It will only affect me if the aspect of dat, if the knowledge is intimate knowledge, which means that I know it and I connect to it intellectually, but I connect to it, then that will produce emotion. And he alludes to it here as well, I believe. But in chapter 3, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says that the word dat, knowledge, in biblical Hebrew is a euphemism for sexual intimacy. Adam knew Eve. And the same thing is with the mind. You could know something as abstract, or you could know it in an intimate basis. And that is what's necessary to create both the love and the intimate knowledge. Kabbalistically is related to the concept of creating the awe and the respect. And we have another beautiful meditation of how to sense God's presence wherever we are, whenever we are. And then we have a little interpretation of what the word emunah means, what faith is. And it's a beautiful, beautiful chapter, I think. So any comments or questions? Yes, there is a verse in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, where Moses says, now Israel, what does God... There's a verse in Deuteronomy in a portion of Akev, where Moses tells the Jewish people, what does God want from you already? What does he want from you? He's not asking for much. He doesn't say these words. Yisrael, now Israel, what does God ask of you? Only to fear him. That phraseology sounds like fear of God, awe of God is no big deal. And to us, it's a big deal. So not just to us, but in Talmud asks this question. The Talmud says, one second. Talmud says, is awe of God, is fear of God something small? That's the implication from the phrase, from the verse. So what's the Talmud's answer? Talmud's answer says yes. Yes, correct. For Moses, it's small. Moses is speaking to us. So Moses is speaking from his own perspective. And Moses says, what does God want from you? Only to fear him. So you ask me, is it a small matter? Yeah, for Moshe, it's a small matter. That's what the Talmud answers. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, 1 second, how does that answer the question? Moshe is talking to us. Moshe says, what does God want of you? Moshe is talking to his audience. So maybe for Moshe, it's easy, but if Moshe is talking to his audience, then Moshe should recognize that to the people he's talking to, it's difficult. And the answer that Rabbi Shneur Zalman gives is that when the Talmud says that for Moshe it's easy, it doesn't just mean the Moshe, the teacher, our leader who took us out of Egypt. It means the Moshe within every soul. And Kabbalistically, there are 7 Jewish leaders who are called the 7 shepherds. And each one represents a certain quality that every Jewish soul has. And Moshe is dat, Moshe is knowledge, intimate knowledge, meditation, to be able to meditate and make a concrete concept, to make an abstract concept concrete, make it meaningful to you. Then that's the capacity of Moshe. And if you have that, you can awaken awe, and it's not that difficult. It takes practice, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman doesn't oversell this point. He doesn't say that it's easy, but it's not a big deal with practice. And it's a very beautiful chapter, I think. Very, 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 I think it's a nice chapter. So that's by way of introduction. I probably missed out some other points that have to be in the introduction, but the good news is we're going to read the chapter directly, and then you'll get it in first person, and you won't need me to bring it to you. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I was just wondering, how does it connect to the GLI class that we studied? There was a quote, I think, from the Talmud that says that the purpose of creation is to know God, and the word that's used was dot, right, in Aramaic.
Yeah, the mean that.
That's from Kabbalah. So how does that correspond to what?
That's a good question, because it could be that. The word dot, the word knowledge, like in English, it could mean, if you're speaking generally, you mean just having information. So it could be used broadly, which is just information, and it could be used specifically, dot, as opposed to wisdom and understanding. And if you use it specifically, the specific word dot would mean connection, intellectual connection. Now, as we mentioned in the JLI, we said that when the Zohar says that God created the world so that people know him, it's really a relationship. And if it's a relationship, then I would guess the word dot is knowledge as an intimate knowledge, as Adam knew Eve, because that's just not just abstract knowledge, but it's a connection. There's a story. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's what I meant to say, that probably Shneur Zalman is deepening the concept to kind of explain broader, what does it mean for us to connect? What does it mean to?
So I would say he's using the more specific meaning of knowledge. Dat could mean all knowledge, but just in other words, including chachma. You could use each one for a general term. You could say, yes, the person is knowledgeable. You don't necessarily mean the specific attribute of dat as opposed to chachma and bina, right? You could use knowledge in a more broad term, or you could talk about you're using the word knowledge specifically. You're using knowledge, not wisdom and understanding. And in that sense, knowledge is that intimacy, that closeness. So this is a story that I probably said in chapter 3. You have to go back to the Zoom and look for it on YouTube. But I think I said it. I must have said it. The Rebbe said the story about the teacher in the Chabad yeshiva in Lubavitch, which is not too far from, I think some of us on the call are from there, from Babroisk, where my great-grandfather is from. In any case, so there was a teacher in the yeshiva in Lubavitch. His name was Michal Nevler. I think he was in a place called Nevel in the Ukraine. In any case, he was a teacher in the yeshiva, and he told and he used to say this story all the time. And he told the people in the yeshiva, it doesn't really matter what you study. If you don't understand this concept, you're wasting your time. And once the Rebbe repeated it at a Hasidic gathering, and he said like this. He said, once upon a time, I like to say that it's like a Hasidic story. There's not a lot of plot, but there's a lot of meaning. So the plot is like this. The plot is that once upon a time there was a farmer, a Jewish farmer, and he was illiterate. So he hired a teacher to teach his children. And one of the functions of the teacher, he would read the mail to the farmer, because the farmer didn't know how to read. So one day the mail comes, the mail arrives, the letter arrives. So the teacher reads it to the farmer, and the farmer faints. What happened? The letter said that the farmer's father passed away. So the farmer fainted. That's the story. That's the end of the plot. So this teacher, Michal Nevler, would say like this. He would say, I have a question. I don't understand. The teacher read the information. He didn't faint. The The farmer read the information and fainted. How could that be? The teacher had firsthand knowledge. The farmer had secondhand knowledge. The teacher could read it black on white. The farmer had to hear it from the teacher. And yet and yet the farmer passed away and the teacher was unmoved. So the answer, of course, Rav Michal would say, is because the teacher doesn't faint because it's the other guy's father. Meaning you can have knowledge, but it's got nothing to do with you. Whatever you learn, if you realize that it's related to you, it's your father, then all of a sudden it affects you. It impacts you. So that's what the teacher taught in the yeshiva, that everything you learn about God, God's someone else's father. Okay, he wants this, it doesn't really matter. It's not relevant to me. I'm not going to be moved. I'm not going to faint. But if it's my father, all of a sudden, it's gonna affect me because the same knowledge, but it's intimate knowledge. That's the story. But we all understand this, that sometimes you know something to be true, but it doesn't affect you. And then at some point, all of a sudden, it clicks and you say, this is not good for me anymore. Right? You have people who, smoked for many years and all of a sudden they stopped. They always knew it was dangerous. But all of a sudden you have some health scare and now you recognize it. What was triggered? Not your wisdom and understanding. What was triggered was your knowledge. So we can talk about that. Let's go to the chapter. Again, comments, questions, don't hesitate to jump in. We'll read. We'll see where we go. Okay. In light of what was already been said on the subject of the lower level of fear, summarized above, which is basically awe of the presence of God. That's what we said last week. Remember, we mentioned last week that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told the students, you should be in awe of God the way you are of another person. Not a very high level of awe, but that's the basic level of awe. So based on this, one will clearly understand the Talmudic comment on the verse. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Only that you fear the Lord your God. That's the verse that Moshe says in Deuteronomy. So the Talmud says, the Gemara asks, is fear then such a small thing? You're making like it's no big deal. Is it so small? And the answer is the Gemara, yes. In the case of Moses, literally, the Gabe, compare relevant to Moshe, it is a small thing, and so forth. That's the Talmud. So now Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, well, I don't understand the question. The answer, at first glance, the answer of the Gemara is incomprehensible. For the verse asks, what does he require of you? So what does it help me that for Moshe it's easy, but for the people it's difficult? And Moshe is talking to the people. Rather, the explanation, however, is as follows. Each and every soul of the house of Israel comprises within it something of the quality of our teacher Moses, peace unto him, for he is one of the 7 shepherds. According to the prophets quote this verse that God tells the Jewish people he's going to make 7 shepherds. According to the Kabbalah, what it means is that there are 7 people who really give, just like a shepherd gives pasture to the sheep, they give us of their quality. So who cause vitality and godliness to flow to the community of the souls of Israel, for which reason they are called shepherds. Our teacher Moses, peace unto him, comprises aspects of them all, and he is called the faithful shepherd. So Moshe is the ultimate giver to the Jewish people. He's the ultimate shepherd, and he gives us spiritual sustenance. This means that he draws down the quality of da'at to the community of Israel, that they may know Hashem, each according to the intellectual capacity of his soul and his root above, and according to the degree of its nurture from the root of the soul of our teacher Moses, peace unto him, which is rooted in the da'at elyon, supernal knowledge of the 10 spheres of Atzilut, which united with their emanator. Without getting too Kabbalistic here, level of Moshe's soul is a level of da'at, is related to da'at, the knowledge of Atzilut in the highest world. We each are a branch of Moshe's soul. We each have da'at within us. We each have the capacity to know and comprehend with intimacy, to comprehend God with intimacy. Okay. For he and his knowledge are one, and he is the knowledge, meaning the sfirot of Atzilut are one with God. Okay. So that's the first thing. First thing, everybody has a Moses within them. In addition to that, the Zohar says that every soul, there are teachers who are the Moses of that generation. In addition, and beyond this, pervasive influence to the community as a whole, their descent in every generation sparks from the soul of our teacher Moses, peace unto him, and they clothe themselves in the body and soul of the sages of that generation, the eyes of the congregation, to impart knowledge to the people that they may know the greatness of God and hence serve him with heart and soul. For the service of the heart, i.e. one's love and fear of God, is according to the da'at, as it is written, know the God of your father and serve him with all your heart and with a longing soul. In other words, the degree that a person could love God and be in awe of God all depends, it's all commensurate with the person's knowledge, with the person's awareness because the love, the emotions respond to the awareness. In the future redemption, we're not going to have, in Messianic times, the verse says we're not going to need a teacher because we're all going to know Hashem. Till then, Jeremiah says this, till then, we have teachers that give us the dot. Only concerning the future Messianic era it is written, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, "Know God, for they will know me. For they shall all know me." In other words, until the time of the redemption, the person has to find knowledge, either within his soul, the part of Moshe that's within him, or from a teacher that is a spark of Moses. But now we're going to explain what do we mean by dat. Doesn't just mean the understanding. It means the connection, the intellectual connection, and making something that's abstract, make it concrete in your mind's eye, make it real to you. And here's where Rabbi Shneur Zalman elaborates upon this. However, the essence of knowledge is not mere knowing alone, that people should know the greatness of God from authors, meaning sages and books. Doesn't mean you can pass the test. You pick up the book and you read about the greatness of God and you've passed the test and you got 100 and you know God. That's not what we're talking about, not the information. But the essential thing is to immerse one's own mind deeply into those things which explain the greatness of God and fix one's thought on God with strength and vigor of the heart and mind, until his thought shall be bound to God with a strong and mighty bond, as it is bound to a material thing which he sees with his physical eyes and upon which he concentrates his thoughts. Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying, and he's going to elaborate upon this, it's not easy, it takes focus. It's not about learning new information, it's about focusing and meditating on what you already know about the greatness of God. And it takes deep focus. You have to focus on a concept and not be distracted. For it is known that dat connotes union, as in the verse, and Adam yada, literally knew Eve. So it means that when we think about this, we're thinking about this and connecting to it, not as an abstract concept, but it's becoming real to me. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman that this capacity and this quality of attaining one's dat, of attaching one's dat to God, is present in every soul of the house of Israel by virtue of its nurture. Unica, suckling from the soul of our teacher Moses, peace on him. In other words, every soul has the capacity to have this deep union with God, with understanding the greatness of God. In other words, that the knowledge that I know about God should become real and concrete to me. Everybody has that capacity because my soul is a spark of Moses, is related it receives nurture from the soul of Moses. However, to reveal it, because I have the body and the physical ego, it's not so easy to get to. And he gives a two-pronged process how to get to that. Only since the soul has clothed itself in the body, it needs a great and mighty exertion, doubled and rebounded, in order to feel and to be attached to God. To get to this point that my knowledge of God becomes concrete and real to me, it takes a lot of effort. What type of effort? So he says double and rebounded. What's the double effort? First thing is to break the own ego. When I'm thinking about my ego, I'm thinking about myself. I'm in the center of the universe. There's no room for God. So that he calls exertion of the flesh, to break the flesh. He doesn't mean fasting or breaking the flesh physically. He means breaking the ego, because he alludes to what we said earlier in chapter 29 about breaking the ego. Like the Zohar said, that if you have a log and the log doesn't catch fire, you have to take an axe and splinter the log, and then it will catch fire. And we're referring to the person's own sense of self. So first is the exertion of the flesh to throw off the bodily shackles, to pound the body, i.e. to weaken its corporality and gain its submission, so that it shall not obscure the light of the soul. As has been mentioned above in the name of the Zohar, that a body unto which the light of the soul does not penetrate should be crushed. This being accomplished by means of penitential reflections, teshuvah, thoughts of teshuvah from the depths of one heart, as explained above. That's the first thing, is to break their own ego. The second thing is literally, it takes focus. And the second one is exertion of the soul, that the service of exertions one's thought not be burdensome to it, to delve into and reflect upon the greatness of God for a long and uninterrupted period. It's very difficult to train the soul to think about a concept for more than 10 seconds, right? Think about a concept for a minute, think about it for 2 minutes, think about it for 5 minutes. It's very, very difficult. It takes practice. Now, how long do I have to think about this meditation meditation in general, specifically the meditation that we're going to talk about later in this chapter? Well, it depends on the person. There are different people. Some people are more spiritually inclined. They need less time. Other people are more not rooted in the 10th spherot. They're not rooted in the spherot of the intellectual spherot. They're more action-based. So it takes longer and more difficult for them to reveal the knowledge within themselves. But in any case, everybody could get to it. Everybody can get to it with work with labor. And that's what he continues. For this measure of time necessary to immerse oneself in godly concept in order to arouse love or fear of God is not the same for every soul. There is a naturally refined soul which immediately, upon considering the greatness of God, attains the fear and dread of him. Right? You have a refined soul. The second they think about a God, immediately they're in awe. Where does it say this? What's an example of this? You don't have to go to a book of Kabbalah. You look at Jewish law, the code of Jewish law. The first section in the code of law reads as follows. Now, if you don't relate to it, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say, it's not talking to you, it's talking to the people who are refined. You may need more, you may need more meditation. So what does it say in the first section of the code of law? As it is written in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, section 1. When a man reflects, it's talking about somebody who, when somebody's lying in bed, doesn't want to get up in the morning. So it's not a new phenomenon. It was an old thing that people didn't want to wake up. So you have to think about that. Hashem is present, waiting for you to serve him. And then all of a sudden, you're going to be in awe and you're going to jump out of bed. Why? When a man reflects that the great king, the supreme king of kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, with whose glory the whole world is filled, stands over him and sees his actions, he will immediately be overcome with fear. Now that's immediately, just takes one moment of focusing. Yeah, for some people, that's all it takes. There is a soul that is lowly, that is of lowly nature and origin, coming from the lower gradations of the 10 Sfirot of Asiya, and it is unable to discover godliness by contemplation except with difficulty and forceful insistence. That takes longer, especially if it has been defiled by the sin of youth, meaning sins when a person was young, for when sins interpose between God, Jew and God, as is written in Sefer Hasidim. Nevertheless, in other words, no matter what type of soul you have, with difficulty and with forceful effort, when his thought greatly exerts himself with vigor and great toil and intense concentration, immersing itself in contemplation of the greatness of God for a long time, there will certainly come to him at least the lower level fear referred to above, as we discussed last week. As the rabbis of blessed memory have said, if a man says, I have labored and I have found, believe him. There the Talmud says, if somebody says, Yagaiti v'lo matzasi, I labored and I was not successful. Says the Talmud, don't believe him. If he says, I was successful and I didn't labor, don't believe him either. If he says, Yagaiti matzasi, I labored and I was successful, Tom, and you should believe. So the idea is you must have the toil. And then we have a beautiful, beautiful verse from King Solomon, from Proverbs. And then we have a Rabbi Shneur Zalman explaining it with great poetry. I love this verse. It is also written with regard to the success one achieves when he labors to attain the fear of God. If you seek it like money and search for it as forbidden treasures, I don't know what forbidden means, hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of God. What does that mean? Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman. This means in the manner of a person seeking a hidden treasure buried in the depths of the earth, for which he digs with tireless toil. So much one delved with unflagging energy in order to reveal the treasure of the fear of heaven, which lies buried and concealed in the understanding of the heart of every Jewish individual. Think of it like mining. You mine deep enough in the earth, you'll find the treasures. It's very difficult to mine. Okay, if you mine your own soul, and you focus on your own soul, and you focus on concentration and contemplation, like you're mining for a treasure, then you will discover the awe of God. What is hidden within the soul? This understanding of the heart being of quality and level of transcending the limitations of time, and this is the natural hidden fear referred to above. So everybody has a natural fear of God, but if you want it to affect you, you have to bring it to your conscious mind. How so? Through awakening the dat, through meditation, thinking about this concept continuously for a while, with focused contemplation. The Hasidim, by the way, would do this during prayer, and that's why Hasidim would pray for very long. They would pray longer than the minyan because the idea was to use a time of prayer as time of meditation. But in any case, as we continue in the chapter, he's going to tell you about a beautiful meditation, which is very practical. And but he still says you have to focus and think about it and concentrate on this concept, and then it will have an effect. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, thank you. I don't know if it's going to be explained later, but sometimes how does Shneur Zalman present the incentive? Like, for example, if I try to send my student to an event or a concert or competition, and the first question they ask, what's the incentive? So what is it? How do you sell it that that's indeed a treasure?
That he doesn't get into. So you're saying that the assumption is that a person wants to serve God, and he wants to create the wings. He wants to be in a relationship, and he wants to create the respect, and he wants to create the love, and he knows the way to do it is through the mind, but it's difficult. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, don't give up. If you're mining for a treasure, you would work hard. So when you focus and you meditate, you also expect it to take effort, but you will succeed. We're assuming the person already values the treasure. And in this case, the treasure is the relationship with God. Because we said we're starting out with a point where a person wants to understand he's doing the action, right? We're going back to chapter 35, where the main thing is the action. But he wants a relationship. You want a relationship, you have to work at it, right? It's not like the Western films that you put in the film and there's some tension, you overcome the tension and live happily ever after. It doesn't work like that. A relationship is something that takes investment. Even a human relationship takes investment of time and effort and contemplation and concentration and investment. And that's with somebody who's you could see before your eyes. To have a relationship, especially an emotional relationship with something that's undefined and abstract, not abstract, but yet in some sense in our senses is totally removed, invisible, unknowable, that's much more difficult. But yes, relationship takes effort. But to your question is, we're assuming that the person wants the treasure. The person doesn't want the treasure, then we're in trouble. And part of what we do is we study Tanya, because as we mentioned all the way in the introduction, is that when we hear about these concepts and we hear about the hidden love within our soul, and we hear that we have a godly soul. So even if I never thought about my godly soul, these words tickle my godly soul and they awaken my godly soul. And that's what the Hasidim would say, that studying about this, even if I'm not there yet, studying about this, what it does is it awakens my thirst of my soul to want to feel this relationship in the consciousness of my mind. So back to your question, how do you get the kid to want to perform? Well,
I know that part because I state the tangible incentives, but in that case, it just was an example. So, but in that case, the higher the soul, the easier it is to kind of understand, right? But
same thing. Some kids relate to music.
Once even the lower soul will start working, they probably will appreciate in the process.
Oh, so you're going to like what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say later about Emunah being training. Faith, it comes from the word training. And some people, they have a natural ear for music or desire for music. So you sit them down at the piano or the violin, they want to play right away. Other kids, it's difficult. They don't relate to it. But with practice, they develop a taste for it. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say, faith in God is basically, the word faith means practice. And if you practice, you develop a taste. And practice what? Practice this meditation that we're going to give now. Beautiful meditation coming up. Very practical, very beautiful, very poetic. So I'm excited. But to your point, Rabbi Shneur Zalman already said, for some people it's easier, meaning it takes less effort, and for some people it takes more effort. But for everybody could achieve this. And the same thing is with music or anything. You could train to do anything. Right? You train to do anything. So the first time you go ice skating, it's not fun. You fall. It's not fun. But after a while, even someone like me could start enjoying it. Right? But it takes training. And other people don't have to train as long. Okay, let's continue. So we're saying, so we have this hidden awe of the love of God within the recesses of the soul. And you have to dig and you have to mine to reveal that. But in order that hidden love should affect your behavior, then you have to bring it into your conscious mind through concentration and through da'at, through connecting to it and knowing it and understanding it, not as something abstract, but as something that's very real to you. However, in order that it should be translated into action, in the sense of fear of sin, so that one will turn away from evil in deed, word, and thought, one needs to bring it to light from the hidden depths of the understanding of the heart, where it transcends time, and to place it within the realm of actual thought, that is the brain. In other words, yes, my soul has a fear of God, but that fear of God is beyond time, it's beyond this world, but I have to make it more real within my conscious mind. This means immersing his thought in it for a lengthy period of time, until its effect will emerge from the potential into the actual, so that he will turn away from evil and do good in thought, speech, and action, because of God who looks and sees, hears and listens and perceives all the deeds and searches his kidneys and heart. These are allusions to what we said last week. In other words, the meditation is that God is here and God knows everything. And if God knows everything, and then it's like someone else is in the room, we mentioned last week, and I'm in awe. Right? Last week we said the story of Yochanan ben Zakkai told the students before he passed away, may you fear God the way you fear people. And they were offended and they said, that's it. We want to fear God more than we fear people. He said, you know what, just do like people, because when someone sins, he says, I hope nobody sees me. So now we're saying God knows everything. Now we're going to get into, I guess Rabbi Shneur Zalman couldn't resist. And how does God know everything? So he goes into this concept of how God knows everything. And he quotes the Maimonides and says, God knows everything. Maimonides has a problem. With us, knowledge is addition to the person. I have myself. There's me, and when I learn something new, I'm adding to myself. And you can't say that about God, because God is one. And if you say God, yes, that now knows something he didn't know yesterday, so he's adding, it's something outside of him being an addition to him. It doesn't work. It's that would be a oneness that is comprised of different parts. No, God is an absolute unity. So therefore, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says. Quotes Maimonides, that the metaphor is not a perfect metaphor, but at least there will be some degree of metaphor, that God knows everything by knowing himself. Because everything is created by himself, so he knows everything not from outside of himself, that he's getting knowledge from outside, but he knows everything by knowing himself. And the metaphor is, if my toenail hurts, I know it. How do I know it? Not because someone taught it to me. I know it because it's part of me. So in other words, by knowing, the quote of Maimonides, b'yediat atzmai, when God knows himself, by knowing himself, he knows all of creation, because all of creation is contingent on him. Okay, it's a philosophical point. I don't want to get into it too much. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman also has to hedge and say, it's not a perfect metaphor, because the metaphor of me knowing my foot is not perfect, because the human being, the toenail can bother the head. In other words, if I know, to know something, it has to affect me also. With God, it's a one-way street. He knows the world, but the world doesn't change him. So that's just the philosophical way to figure out how God knows everything, even though he remains unchanged. So if you're curious about this, we'll come back to this when we finish the chapter. But we'll read it inside, we'll get by it, and then we're going to get to the more practical meditation, which is, I think, absolutely beautiful. Okay, here we go. So for the philosophers in the group, pay attention. Here we go. Now, although he has no bodily likeness, right, the sages say as follows: as the rabbis, the blessed memory said, reflect upon three things and you will not come to sin. That's what it says in the Mishnah, in Ethics of the Fathers. Think about three things and you will not come to sin. Know what is above, an eye that sees, and an ear that hears, and chulu, etc. Everything that happens is written in a book. In other words, the Mishnah says, if you want to not sin, think about that God is always watching. I remember the first time I got into a car with a Jew, and he had the GPS in the car. It was like a new technology. The guy was going crazy. He said, it's amazing, it's amazing, it's amazing. What's so amazing? He says, now I have a metaphor for the idea that God can keep track of the entire world and watching everything, because if the satellite can do it for the GPS, then God can do it. So here you have a visible thing where you can keep track of all the cars driving around in the world. In other words, God, so a person has to think about that God, the eye is the eye that sees. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, 1 second, God has no eye. Obviously, it's a metaphor. So he quotes. So he says, although he has no bodily likeness, so God has no eye, he has no ear. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, oh, even better. Physical eye is limited. God has no eye, so he knows even more. On the contrary, i.e., this is the very reason that everything is revealed and known to him infinitely more than, for example, through the physical medium of sight and hearing. The GPS needs to be able to connect to the GPS piece. And if it's a cloudy day, the connection is not that great because it's a physical thing. But with Hashem knows everything even without the physical medium, and therefore he knows it in a much stronger way. What's the metaphor? Again, he quotes, he's explaining, right? Maimonides doesn't use these words exactly, but he says this quote, that by knowing himself, he knows everything. Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains, by way of illustration, God's seeing and hearing, and the fact that everything is revealed to him and known to him, are like a man who knows and feels within himself all that is happening to and being experienced by each of his 248 organs, such as cold and heat. Feeling even the heat in his toenails, for example, as when he is scorched by fire. So also their essence of substance, and all that is affected in or by them is known to the person and sensed by the brain, right? So how does God know everything? Just like I know what happens to my toe, because it's part of me. Everything in this world is dependent and brought into existence by God. So whatever happens to them is known to him. And he says, similar manner, in a similar manner of knowledge, by way of analogy, God knows all that befalls all created beings of both higher and lower worlds, because they all receive their flow of life from him. As it is written, for from you come all things. This is also the meaning of what we say in our prayer. And no creature is hidden from you, inasmuch as all creatures all created beings emanate from him. So therefore, if you know, just like I know my body, God knows everything that happens in the world. And he quotes Maimonides to back him up. And as Maimonides, speaking as a philosopher, has said, and we say not only Maimonides, but the Kabbalists also agree with him to a certain degree. We're not going to get into that right now. And this has also been agreed to by scholars of the Kabbalah, as Rav Moshe Cordovito writes in the Pardes de Ramak, that by knowing himself, as it were, he knows all created things, whose source of existence is his true existence. In other words, we're basically saying God knows everything. God has eyes that see and ears that hear, not physically, but God knows everything because God, by knowing himself, he knows everything. And now we're going to say and explain that it's not the metaphor is not perfect. This analogy of the soul and body, however, is only to calm the ear. In other words, to give us some indication. In truth, however, the analogy bears no similarity at all to the analog. In other words, the body, the metaphor of me knowing what's happening to my toenail, to my feet. If my feet get hot, my brain knows about it. Is not a good metaphor. Why not? For the human soul, even the rational and divine soul is affected by the events which transpire with the body and its pain, by reason of its being actually clothed within the vivifying soul, which is clothed in the body itself. Why does my brain know? The fact that my brain knows what's happening in my toe, in my foot, that the other side of that is that if the foot hurts, the brain feels it. In other words, it's enclosed within it. It's a two-way street. I know what's happening in my foot, and if my foot is in pain, my brain is distracted. How God, however, is not, heaven forbid, affected by the events of the world and its changes, nor by the world itself. None of them affect any change in him, God forbid. In order to help us understand this well with our intelligence, the scholars of truth, the Kabbalists, have been already treated it at length in their books. In other words, this is a philosophical, theological, Kabbalistic problem, how God knows everything, but is not affected, knows everything by knowing himself, yet he is not affected by them. Unlike the metaphor of the body, which the brain knows what's happening with the toenail, but the foot, the toe, does not affect, but the foot, and therefore the toe does affect the brain. With Hashem, it's only one way. So if you want to figure out how this works philosophically, go read the philosophical books and the works of the Kabbalists. Bottom line is, we all believe that this is the case. All Jews believe that's the theology. We believe this. However, all Jews, as descendants of the patriarchs who believe in God, are believers, descendants of believers, without any speculation of mortal intellect whatsoever. And they declare you were the same before the world was created, and so on and so forth. In other words, the accepted belief in the Jewish in the Jewish faith is that God knows everything, but he is unchanged, as we said before in chapter 2. So that's it. That's the meditation. The meditation is that God is present and God knows what I'm doing. And again, this is a meditation that the Mishnah says. There are eyes that see and ears that hear. Now, I know that. Is that going to affect my behavior? Not unless I think about this every day, focused for a few minutes at a time, at a minimum. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman. Now, therefore, each individual Jew, whoever he may be, when he ponders upon this for a considerable time each day, how God is truly omnipresent in the higher and lower worlds, and that that the actual heaven and earth is truly filled with his glory, and he looks, seeks, and searches his kidneys and heart, and all his actions and words, and counts his every step, then fear will be implanted in his heart throughout the day, when he will again meditate on this, even with a superficial reflection. Basically, he's saying if you start the day with a meditation, then throughout the day, even with a superficial reflection, just remembering the meditation, it will still affect you. So that at any time or moment, he will turn away from the evil and do good in thought, speech, and action, so as not to rebel, God forbid, in the sight of his glory, whereof the whole world is filled. This is in accord with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his disciples, quoted above in last week. This then is the meaning of the verse, only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways. For this is the fear that leads to the fulfillment of God's commandments, turning away from evil and doing good. This is the lower level of fear, which has been discussed earlier. As it implies to Moses, what that is to say, in relation to the quality of da'at, that is the divine soul of every Jew. This is a minor thing, as has been stated above. For dat is the faculty which connects the hidden understanding of the heart with revelation in actual thought, as known to the students of the Kabbalah. Okay. So that's the first thing. We're almost done the chapter. We have a beautiful meditation coming up, and then we have an idea about the practice. So the end is absolutely beautiful. But just to summarize what we said till here, we're saying as follows. There are different levels of being in awe of God. We're going to discuss some of those levels in the future weeks. Next week, Mem Gimel, chapter 43. Next week, we discuss 2 levels of awe and 2 levels of love. So there are many different levels of awe of God. Some of them are very lofty. But the basic level of respect and awe is somebody else here? God is watching. Don't do something that would be offensive to him. Just like if I'm in a relationship and you don't like something, you don't like when I do something, I'm not going to do it. If you're here, if I have the basic amount of respect for you. How do you do this? So you have to think about the fact that God knows everything. God sees everything, because by knowing himself, he knows the entire world. And that we say, that's easy for Moshe. What does Moshe mean? For the capacity of dat, for the capacity of the Jewish soul to be able to think and meditate and make the abstract real, that anybody can do. It may take more work, it may take less work, but anybody can do it. Now we're going to add one more meditation, beautiful meditation. The meditation is going to be, how do I see that God is present everywhere? So beautiful meditation. This one is really nice. Here we go. In addition to this, one should remember that as in the case of a mortal king, the fear of him relates mainly to his inner essence and vitality and not to his body. For when he is asleep, though the body does not change, there is no fear of him. We have to set up this point. This point is when you fear somebody, when you're in awe of somebody, you're not in awe of their external aspect. You're in awe of the internal self, the internal personality. You're afraid of the king. You're in awe of the king. The king is asleep. You're not in awe of him. You're not in awe of the body. You're in awe of his personality. Now, and surely his inner essence and vitality are not perceived by physical eyes, but only by the mind's eye, through the physical eyes beholding his body and garments and knowledge that his vitality is clothed in them. I see a person. I want a relationship with your soul. I don't see your soul. I see your body. I see the vitality of your body. I know you have a soul. So too, and if this is so, he must truly likewise fear God when gazing with his physical eyes at the heavens and earth and all their hosts, wherein is enclosed the infinite light of the blessed Ein Sof that animates them. What he's saying is, whenever you look with your physical eyes and you see anything of the heavens and the earth and all their hosts, in other words, any creation, any physical creation, when you look at, you should be able to sense and understand that God is present here. Why? Because what gives it life? What gives it life is the spark of God within it, or in stuff, the infinite light that creates it. We say, well, I don't see the infinite light. I just see the physical creation. I just see a table. I see a tree. I see a sky. I see Mars. Doesn't matter. By seeing that physical creation, you understand that there's something giving it life, and that is God. Just like when I see the king, I see the body, but I'm not afraid of the body. I'm in awe of the personality. I don't see the personality. Doesn't matter. The body is just a garment. So basically what he says, I look out the window. I look in the window, in the room, outside the room, wherever I look, I see creation. What am I looking at? I'm looking at the presence of God. I don't see God. I see the garments, but within that garment is the infinite light. And although many garments are involved in this vestitude, so that when one gazes at created beings, one does not perceive that they are but garments of the divine life force. You don't see the divine life force. There is no difference or distinction at all in the fear of a mortal king, whether he is naked or clothed in one or many garments. Right? What is he saying? He's saying, I see a person. Am I less in awe of you because you're wearing a winter coat? Because you have many layers? No, it doesn't matter. I know that beneath all these layers is you. So if I respect you regardless of how many garments you're wearing. So what he's saying is, when I look at creation, every aspect of creation is what? Is a garment for the infinite light. So if I could think about this, when I look at the trees, I look at the sky, I look at the water, I look at the ocean, what do I see? I see the presence of God, but you don't see God, you see the garments. Doesn't matter, but I know God is within the garments. Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say, if you think about this and meditate about this and practice, then it's going to be easy. So let me finish. I think I'm almost done. Yeah, give me 2 minutes. Give me 1 minute, Bob, and then we take the question. So what's the main thing? The essential thing, however, is the training. to habituate one's mind and thought continuously, so that it is always so that it always remains imprinted in his heart and mind, that everything one sees with his eyes, the heavens and the earth and all that they contain, constitute the outer garments of the King, Holy One, blessed be He. What is my meditation? A meditation is, by the way, you open up the prayer book before the Shema. You talk about King David is talking about nature, how beautiful it is, and how God creates this unbelievable nature. Rabbi Shneur Zalman is adding insight. What is nature? Nature is the garment of Hashem. So I have to meditate and think about the fact that everything I see in the heavens and on earth and all they contain constitutes the outer garments of the King, the Holy One, blessed be He. In this way, he will constantly remember their inwardness and vitality, which is godliness. This will create within him fear of God, because God is always present. Because I always see nature. If I always see nature, I always see the outer garments of God. If I see the outer garments, I should be able to see God himself. I should be able to understand that God himself is present. And then we get to the point that I told Vicky earlier. This is the idea of emunah. This is also implied in the word emunah, which is usually translated as faith, which is a term indicating training, to which a person habituates himself like a craftsman who trains his hands and so forth. I think we're almost done. Yeah. This should also constitute remembrance of the dictum of the sages of blessed memory, acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which parallels the injunction, you shall appoint a king over you, as has been explained elsewhere and so on. According to the Kabbalah, the commandment to appoint a king over you means to accept and realize that God is present and you're accepting the sovereignty of God. But how is God present? You have to realize that he's present. And one way to do it is the meditation of that all of creation is the garment. Within the garment is the king. For God, blessed be he, forgoes the creatures of the higher and lower worlds and uniquely bestows his kingdom upon us as we accept a heavenly yoke. In other words, God asks us to do his
Did the rabbi drop out?
It could be internet problems again.
So take it away, Vicky.
Well, no, I'm not a host, but I can text him though. Don't leave. Don't leave. We want to know, right? The meditation. I told him that we are waiting for him. So please don't leave. He's trying to sign back in. Hold on. Meanwhile, Bob, you can ask your question. Maybe we can find the answer.
Yeah, he just texted me too. He said, trying to sign back on. My apologies.
Yeah, that's the message I got.
Yeah, I might as well wait for him to come back.
Yeah. I don't think any of us will be able to answer your question.
Now, the classes that are live, are they usually done at his house or at the Chabad Center, the synagogue?
It's at the Chabad, but usually at the other building, the one that's next to the main one.
I see.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry, the internet just dropped, so I had to connect it to my phone now. Apologies. I guess I was afraid of your question, Bob. Go ahead. That's why I jumped off.
There you go. I was just wondering if, isn't there a fallacy in this thought in that, isn't it easy to look at all things of creation and think of God when everything is good? But when there's so much evil in the world, the fellow with a revolver, or the machine gun, or Putin, or tsunami, or, you know, it's not as easy to reflect on the greatness of Hashem when there is so much evil. So isn't that a
Right, so I
fallacy
think-
in what you're asking us to do?
Yeah, I think that is certainly a challenge, and especially when you look at the subjective behavior of people, which is related to free choice. He's more talking about natural phenomenon, but even natural phenomenon is a lot of pain and suffering is caused by
Yeah,
a lot of
tsunami, a flood, a
Tsunami.
hurricane,
illness,
earthquake. Yeah.
Yeah, illness. So it's certainly a challenge, and it's certainly, you know, that it's certainly a theological, the number one theological problem. The question is, if I need to sense a closeness to God, could I sense a closeness to God by sensing that nature is an expression of God? That's the question. In other words, you're looking selectively, right? In other words, yes, we're looking at a certain aspect of society, of the creation, and we're ignoring the pain for this moment. And the purpose is to sense a closeness to Hashem. So I'm sitting in the woods, I'm sitting on the beach, or I'm looking at the beautiful sky or the night sky, and then I'm moved. And the question is, what am I moved by? So one person is moved by the beauty of the universe, and the other person is saying, I'm moved by the beauty of the universe, but I sense that the presence of God is here. You don't see God, okay, but you see the garment, you see the expression. What's keeping this creation in existence? Oh, that's the presence of God. So Rabbi Schneur Zalman says, if you can shift your perspective, that every time you see nature, what you're sensing that this is the presence of God. It takes practice, just like playing piano takes practice. But if you can play that poetry in your brain and focus on this every day when you pray, and King David is talking about the beauty of the universe, the hills, the mountains, the valleys, and what you're really thinking about is the beauty of the creation, and the presence of God that is enclosed within it, then you constantly sense that you're in the presence of God. Now, you can always ask, just like King David says, you can always ask, can I enjoy my vacation if there's so much suffering in the world? Well, in a way, it's going to. If you think about the suffering in the world, you're not going to be able to enjoy the night sky. You're not going to be able to enjoy the beauty of the Niagara Falls or the beauty of the sea. You're not going to be able to enjoy it, yes. But is it possible for the human being to compartmentalize and realize that for this moment, I'm connecting to the beauty of nature and I'm moved by that and I'm inspired by that? I think we're able to do that. So Schneur Zalman is saying you have to add a dimension. Don't just look at the external. Now, look at what's beneath it. God's presence is beneath it. And the takeaway is that God's presence is always here. Now, you have a wonderful theological question of why does God create suffering? Short answer is, I don't know. But that's a very good question. Moses asked it, and Abraham asked it, and everyone asks it. But the idea here is, again, this is not a philosophy book per se. We're not here to solve the mysteries of the universe. What we're trying to do, we always go back to it, that at least in the first section of the book, the first 53 chapters, it's more of a guide to life. So how can I feel the presence of God? So for me, this is probably one of the most practical things that Tanya said so far. If you want to think about the awe, you have to think about this every day. Practice, train yourself to think when you take your walk in nature, train yourself to think that I'm embraced by nature. I see the beauty of nature. I'm moved by the beauty of nature, But beneath that and within that is the infinite light. So I'm always sense that I'm in the presence of God.
No, but my whole point is that there's the flip side. And if you're living in London and they tell a Londoner, every time you go out and you see the sunshine, think of God, and it rains 362 days a year, it's not a good setup.
I would say the tree, I would say the flower. Hopefully in London there's
But
also
you know what I'm getting at.
Yes. No, there's no question that we're not going to solve all the world's problems at once. In other words, it's like I said before, we live our life, we compartmentalize. We try not to allow the genuine pain and suffering into letting us function as and enjoy our vacation or enjoy the day. I would say even more. I would say that even within myself, I have certain aspects of my life that are troublesome, and if I focus on them too much, will rob me of joy. And I have no choice but to put that aside, because at least in the temporary, because I have to function in this world, and part of functioning is being joyous, and finding joyous is finding peace and finding serenity. But does it mean that my life is perfect? Does it mean I have no areas that are difficult? No, but if I want to be healthy, if I want to live a balanced life, I have to choose what I'm focusing on. So I agree that especially for someone who knows about suffering, or even especially someone who's suffering, it becomes that much harder. But if I'm motivated to sense the presence of God, even if I'm suffering, and maybe if I'm suffering, I need the presence of God even more to give me the resilience. So then where do I sense God? Do I sense God only by thinking abstractly? Or do I say that I could sense him because I sense his garments? I see the creation. I see he's here. He's wearing the hood, but he's beneath the coat. If you can sense that degree of closeness to Hashem, then you have something so tangible, right? That's the point here. The point is we're trying to make it tangible. We're trying to get from the abstract to the tangible. That's what dot is. And I think that this meditation is doing just that. By telling you that when you look at the tree, understand that the life of the tree is godliness. So every time you see a tree, you see the tree, but you also see what's beneath the tree. And the same thing is for any creation. And then if you train yourself to think about this way, then you're always embraced by the presence of God. Now that may heighten the question of God. How come God could allow suffering? That's gonna heighten the question. King Solomon says, more knowledge, more pain. If you have Yosef Dat, if you really sense the presence of God, you'll have more questions and more pain. But
yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, is it a good model to set up that if you're to go out and look at the beauty in life, think of God, but you have 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, and I don't know that they saw that much beauty, and yet they still had the awe of God. So I don't know that Zalman had it exactly right. But anyway, I just, sometimes I'm not saying
it works for everybody, this perfect meditation. He adds it as an addition. In other words, his main point, the philosophical point, is that God knows everything, because as Maimonides says, by knowing himself, he knows everything. I think he's adding to make it more tangible for people who respond to something more materialistic. In other words, something more physical. Now, for some people, that sometimes this meditation won't work. So then we fall back at the underlying idea that the Mishnah says. God is the eye sees, the ear. The eye sees, the ear hears, and everything that's the Mishnah. And like Maimonides explained, how does God know everything? He has no ear, he has no eye, but it means that God knows everything because of his knowing himself. Now, some people, they can relate to that, and that is enough to be able to get them to sense the presence of God, because they could think about this abstractly. For some people, I think that adding the idea that you could see God within nature, or sense God within nature, I think that makes it a lot more tangible for some people. I'm not saying it's going to work for everybody all the time. I'm not saying it's not going to add more questions, but I think we're looking at a very limited aspect, how to make the presence of God seem real to me. I think that's the question that we're trying to answer, I think.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Toda rabba. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is a beautiful chapter. I did plan to, but I would like to comment on the question that Bob is asking, because it's an important question. And I think with the Holocaust survivors, as you said, they focused on something. They didn't focus on the things that are tragic. They try to find the things, like little things that will keep them going, and find God in little things and little pleasures or little memories, or like something, maybe even stimulates them to connect to Hashem more. I think it depends on the focus on life. And the harder life you have, probably you're going to have more incentive, speaking of incentive, to find that connection. So that's I didn't plan to, but I just couldn't help it. I just commented.
Yeah, there's no question that it's going to be, when a person suffers, there is the theological challenge to God is heightened, but not just the theological, also the emotional, right? If God exists, not only as an intellectual question, but also as an emotional question. If God exists, then how could he allow for the suffering? So I think that yes, when somebody suffers, the entire notion of a relationship with God, on one hand, becomes far more challenging. I don't know, because I never really suffered, but some people would say that for them, at least in the subjective experience, it's also more rewarding. But I could see that it's far more challenging. And I agree with that. I'm not negating that. And I'm not saying that this meditation will solve that problem.
Right. But I did. Yeah, I did have a question, though. It is a philosophical question about how God is not affected by the world. What do we do about places in the Torah where Hashem regrets or Hashem reacts?
Yeah, so Maimonides would tell you that's all metaphor. It means that he's acting in a way as if he's angry, right? Mm-hmm. You know, God laughs, God is happy, God is angry. There cannot be change within God. That's the premise, because God is oneness. And if he's being changed, and he's not complete, and if you can affect him, then he's vulnerable. And he really isn't vulnerable. He presents himself as vulnerable once he creates, after the tzimtzum, once he creates a 10 spheros, so he wants the relationship. So he creates a system where he becomes vulnerable, but essentially his essence is not vulnerable. And therefore you can't make him happy, you can't make him sad. So that's the challenge in the metaphor of, usually to know something, you have to be invested within it. And usually if you're invested within it, it's going to affect you. Like the relationship between the brain and the toe. So you have the nervous system that connects the brain to the toe. And that's why the brain knows what's happening with the toe. Wonderful. Problem is, it's a two-way street. And if the brain wants to think philosophy, but the toe is hurting, you can't think any philosophy if your toe is hurting, right? So you're being sort of trapped and limited by the knowledge that you know, by the connection that you have, because you're invested. Now, for God's going to have it both ways. On one hand, he knows because he's invested. On the other hand, the fact that he's invested in that thing does not affect him. So it's like, think of it as you have glass that's transparent. You could look at it two ways, and then you have glass that is, just one of the ways it's tinted. One way it's not, right? So it's a one-way relationship. Now, so it's something that is difficult for us to understand. The Kabbalists, right? Maimonides talks about this at great length, and the Kabbalists also deal with it. This is a philosophical question and a theological question. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman says that's not what chapter 42 is about. Chapter 42 just alludes to it. He says, look, we have to, but bottom line belief is that God knows, even though he doesn't change. So God knows. That is the basic level of all. Basic level of all, going back to the Talmudic story, is if I'm in a relationship with you and I respect you, and you're in this room, I'm not going to do what doesn't make you happy. If you say, do me a favor, don't leave your shoes in the middle of the room. If you're not home, I could leave my shoes in the middle of the room. But if you're home, you're standing right here, I can't leave my shoes in the middle of the room if I know that's not what you want. Especially not if I'm trying to have a relationship with you and love you and bring you flowers for your anniversary at the same time, right? Doesn't work. You have to have a basic level of awe, basic level of respect before you can have the love. So what's the basic level of respect? You're in your presence. I'm not going to do something that is offensive to you. So for that, you have to sense that God isn't, that you're in the presence of God. How so? So if you're philosophically inclined, read Maimonides. Maimonides says, by knowing him, well, even before that, the Mishnah says, understand and meditate that God is an eye that sees and an ear that hears. What does that mean? How does that work? God doesn't have an eye. Okay, so read Maimonides. Maimonides will tell you that by knowing himself, he knows everything. To make that a little bit more tangible, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, look, by knowing himself, he knows everything, meaning God is everywhere. God creates everything, and therefore God knows everything. Okay, so wherever you look, you're really looking at the garment of the king. Say, well, I don't see the king, I see the garment. It doesn't matter how many garments the king is wearing. If you know he's here, you're in awe of his presence, regardless of how many garments he's wearing. So you can get to the point where every time, especially now in the Northeast, you're looking on the street and all you see is beauty. All you see is the changing colors. All you see is beauty. You could see it as, wow, this is beautiful. Or you could see this is the presence of God. Now, if you live in Hawaii and you're seeing the ocean, you're seeing the waves of the ocean, same idea. Whether you're living in London, hopefully there's some nature there. I don't know. But in any case, the point is, yeah, we're talking about focusing on the place where the presence of God could become tangible to you, because that's what that is. That is that it should not remain in the book. It should be real for you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I also like that metaphor about the king who is asleep, because you don't do anything even if the king is asleep, because he will eventually wake up, and you don't want.
No, he's saying the opposite. He's saying the opposite. He's saying when the king is asleep, you're not afraid of him, unless he has closed caption cameras. But I'm just saying you're not afraid of the body. You're afraid of the consciousness. You're afraid of the soul.
Right.
But you don't see the soul. It doesn't matter. You don't. In your metaphor, you're afraid of the king's soul, even if he's asleep. But the point here is, we're not afraid of the flesh and blood. You're afraid the guy's dead. You're not afraid of him anymore, right? You're afraid of the personality.
You're afraid to do something because eventually he will wake up and you will affect the relationship.
Right.
So you're afraid of like his essence and the nature of the relationship. That's a beautiful metaphor.
Yes, indeed. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. We're 42. We're going to get to 43 next week. God willing, next week we may study up there. There's the conference of Shluchim. I'll be in Brooklyn with my child when my son is going to the camp. Maybe next week. Maybe could be we'll do it. Let's see. Let's assume we're doing it unless they hear otherwise. Okay, 43. We talk about 2 levels of love, 2 levels of awe. The excitement continues. The bad news is that we're ready within reach of the end of the book. We have to figure out what we'll do afterward. But in any case, we'll worry about that some other time. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful Shabbos, and we should meet each other in good health. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Be well.